Hello everyone. So today I'd like to resume the series on tic-tac-toe. And before going into the main topic of the video, I'd like to clear up a small mistake I did in the first video. So I said that in the case of 5 in a row tic-tac-toe on an infinite board, the game was a win for player 1. But this is actually only a conjecture. What was shown is that the maker-breaker version of tic-tac-toe is a maker-win on an infinite board. Okay, but as I discussed in the previous video, if the maker-breaker version, is a maker-win, that doesn't tell us anything about the game. While if it is a breaker-win, then that tells us that the original game is a draw. So yeah, we don't know yet about the original game. Now I'd like to continue on our little path of showing that for many squares in a row the game is a breaker win and thus a draw in the original version. So in the first video I had talked about how with pairing strategies one could show that the game is a breaker win for more than 9 squares in a row. Okay, and so now we're going to prove the result for 8, for the 8 in a row. And we're actually going to use a slightly different strategy because basically the issue with the pairing strategy is that it's not flexible enough, right? Breaker's move only depends on maker's last move. It doesn't depend on any of the moves before that. So basically breaker's not looking at the state of the board as a whole. It's just looking at the one previous move and responding accordingly to that. So obviously that's pretty far from an optimal strategy, and by making the strategy more flexible we can hope to get some better results. So that's what we're going to do here. So this proof was done by Zetters. So T-G-L Zetters. Even though this is not his actual name, he was writing under a pseudonym. Okay, and his idea is instead of doing a simple pairing, basically we're going to add some flexibility to the strategy, and after we've played a couple of flexible moves we will be able to finish the strategy with a pairing. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, the flexible part is that first of all Zetters had the very nice idea of subdividing the infinite plane into smaller regions. Okay, so let's say you have the plane and basically you're going to cut it up into regions. Okay, and then basically when maker plays, maker is going to play in one of these regions and breaker is going to respond in the same region. Okay, and since these regions are finite, basically what we will do is we will analyze the game on each one of these regions and show that breaker is able to defend on that particular region. Now of course maker's goal is to make 8 squares in a row on the whole board. But that does not require having 8 squares in a row in a given region, right? Like you could have some overlapping streaks. So we're going to have to take that into account, of course. Now let's get into the more technical part. So which region was chosen by Zetters to tile the plane? Well, it's this sort of S shape. Okay, so it's like a 4 tile by 3 tile shape that has some sort of offset. Okay, and how does this region tile the plane? Well, of course you could just repeat it everywhere, like you put a copy of this to the left, to the right, on top, underneath, and you could tile the plane like this, but this won't work very well for the next steps of the proof. So actually here, here there are some shapes in the other direction, okay? So if here it's pointing towards the right, here it's pointing towards the left, okay? Okay, and basically instead of just repeating this shape identically to tile a plane, we will take this larger shape, okay, which is composed of two regions. So this is two regions, and thanks to this we can periodically tile the plane by just repeating this tile, okay, everywhere. Okay, so now let's see why we chose this tile. Basically this tile is quite special because it's going to be very useful when looking at streaks of 8 in a row. We're going to see that if you have a streak of 8 in a row on the plane, this actually implies some pretty strong conditions about the existence of a streak in one given region. Okay, so let's focus on the shape here and try to think what happens, for instance, if we have a streak of 8 squares in a row horizontally. Well, then it's quite obvious to see that 4 of these 8 squares must lie in one given region, right? Like, for instance, if your streak starts here, let's say if it starts here, so it avoids touching this square, well, then there will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and here I will already have filled in a whole row of a region, right? Like here we can imagine that there's a region here. Okay, so horizontally it's quite obvious. Vertically, here's a little trick used by Zetters. Instead of saying, okay, a vertical streak must go through one of these long columns and must fill it completely, which maybe it does. What he did instead was he looked at whether it had to fill or not these small columns, and actually it does. Okay, for instance, if you start here, so I start here on purpose so I don't fill in this whole small column. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and here if you repeat this shape identically, you will see that here there's a small column. This is a column of 2 squares here underneath, not one of 3. Okay, and so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Perfect. So once again we filled in a small column. And of course, even if we had started in a large column, well, it's just the same thing, right? It's like starting here or here. It's the same thing. Okay, so now we just have the diagonals left. And this is where we can really see the usefulness of placing a two-region complex, right? With two shapes going in opposite directions, because this will force one full diagonal to be occupied. Otherwise, like if they were all in the same direction, you could just go in the direction opposite for your diagonals, and that would be an issue. But here in this case, so let's say you're looking at a streak of 8 in this direction, okay? And so you want to avoid as much as possible going through a whole diagonal. So let's say you start here. Well, then you have 1, 2, 3, and like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, and I would have to draw the shapes here. So let's see if we quickly draw these shapes. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Something like this. Okay. So here you're going through a small diagonal. Okay, so this is an issue. But here, basically, here, this region over here will be one facing the same direction as this one. It will be pointing towards the right, let's say. And so, once again, you see that here we have a whole diagonal here that is filled in. Okay, so let's recap what we just said. So we just said that if we're looking at regions that have this particular shape, then if there's a streak of 8 consecutive squares in the whole infinite plane, well, there must be a region in the plane where these 8 squares follow one of the following streaks. So we have the 2 small columns here, we have the 3 rows, and we have the diagonals of 3 squares. Okay, so let's say these are all of the combinations that Breaker needs to absolutely avoid. Breaker needs to avoid Maker controlling one full streak in here. And if we can show that Breaker is able to do this in one particular region, then he will be able to do it in all of the regions, since of course we said that as soon as Maker plays in a region, Breaker will respond in the same region. So this is the nice trick. We can just study this finite game, this finite variant of the game, and if we show that Breaker can win in this variant, then we will have shown that Breaker wins on the infinite board. Okay, so of course you could just check that Breaker wins this with a computer, right? This board is not very large, the game is not very complicated, so you could just write some lines of code, test this out on your computer, and you will see that Breaker does have a winning strategy. But I'm going to try and present quickly the proof that Zetters made. Okay, so first of all, let's try to rewrite this shape, okay, or more like rewrite this new variant that we've created in order to make it visually a little bit more appealing. So instead of taking the shape, here we have three rows of 4 squares. So I'm going to take a rectangle, so a 3 by 4 rectangle. Okay, as such. And now we just want to represent all of the streaks that we need to avoid. And actually, look, this 4 by 3 rectangle, this 3 by 4 rectangle is obtained basically by just shifting these rows and aligning them. Okay, and when you do this, these diagonals become the columns. Okay, the rows, of course, remain the rows, and the 2 small columns here become these small diagonals over here. Okay, and so now we're going to look at this shape instead and simply say that Breaker needs to avoid Maker occupying either a whole row, a whole column, or one of these 2 small diagonals. And I think we can all agree that looking at this game is visually more appealing and simpler than this kind of weird board with weird rules. Okay, even though of course this is the shape that is absolutely crucial on the infinite board. This is just another way of visualizing it. Alright, so let's introduce quickly a coordinate system which will be of use. So the columns will be A, B, C, and D, and the rows will be 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so now the strategy for this proof is, I'm not going to lie, there are a bunch of cases that we need to go through, and we just need to be organized to navigate all the different cases. Okay, so what we will do is look at all the possible combination of 2 first moves that Maker can play. So look at all of the basically all of the possible positions after Maker's first 2 moves, and find a winning strategy for Breaker in each one of them. Of course, there's a very large amount of positions, so we will use some tricks to make the casework actually feasible by hand. All right. So first of all, I will outline the strategy that Breaker will use, right? So here we can see that these two small diagonals are extremely dangerous. Indeed, Maker only needs to play 2 squares on these diagonals to win the game. So Breaker absolutely needs to block these 2 diagonals. This is like the top priority, basically. So the strategy begins as such. As soon as Maker plays, first we identify the side of the board on which Maker plays. So, for instance, here Maker is playing on the left side, and here he would be playing on the right side. So left is columns AB, right is column CD. Now, Breaker will respond to this first move by occupying the small diagonal that is on the same side. Okay, and how do you choose which square you occupy? Well, actually, we will choose the square that is on a different column from Maker's first move. So, for instance, if Maker goes here, then Breaker will go here. Okay? And this is just pretty useful because basically, like, if Breaker responded here, then you could have some sort of some troublesome attacks by Maker. If you play it out a little bit, you will see that this is actually a more accurate response. Okay, and of course it will help us in our proof. Like finding a strategy while just playing the game is pretty easy, but actually outlining a proof is pretty hard because of all the different cases that you need to take into account. All right. So now let's look at Maker's second move. So of course, if Maker plays on the same column, okay, as his first move, so for instance, if he goes here, or if he had gone here, well then Maker creates a direct threat, right? He threatens to win by controlling this whole column, and so Breaker has to answer by blocking off the column. All right. Now, if Maker decides to play in a different column, then we will distinguish 2 cases. We will distinguish the case in which Maker plays on the same side and the case in which Maker plays on an opposite side. Okay. We will distinguish this in the proof, but Breaker's response to the 2 moves is actually quite similar. It's just the structure of the board, let's say, that will be different. So in any case, we will control the second diagonal. Okay, since Maker's second move is not on the same column, so let's say he goes here, he cannot be creating a direct threat, right? So since he's not creating a direct threat, let's say Breaker has some sort of a breather move, and so Breaker is going to control the other small diagonal. Okay, and here it doesn't really matter which square Breaker chooses. Both should be good enough to win the game. So I can take this one. Okay, and then the game continues. Right. So now that I've given a little idea of the strategy, let's go through all the different cases one by one. And here we will use a little trick, which is basically to say that the boards are isomorphic up to permutation of rows and columns. Okay, so this is what Zetters used, and basically it means that, for instance, in the case where Maker's 2 moves are on different columns, we can actually reduce all of the different possibilities to these 2 boards. Okay. Now, of course, these are not at all the only two possible placements for maker moves where he doesn't play on the same column. Basically, okay, maker plays his two moves, breaker plays also his two moves. Just here we didn't write down breaker's moves, as these are actually quite variable, so we don't actually know where they're going to be in all of the different cases. And what we will do is we will just permute the columns and rows in a way that maker's first move always ends up in the top left, and then the second move either ends up in the top right in the case where the two moves are in the same column. Either we will make it end up on the bottom right in the case where they have not played on the same row. Okay, so yeah, by making permutations of rows and columns, we can always get to one of these two cases. This is pretty obvious once you've thought a little bit about how you can permute rows and columns of the board. And now, okay, and now we're going to look at the case, as I said earlier, where maker plays his first two moves on opposite sides of the board. So let's say this first move was played on the left, for instance, and the second move was played on the right, or vice versa, but it doesn't matter. Well, now, thanks to breaker's strategy, we actually know that breaker has played his two moves in these two columns. Okay? Why so? Well, because for the first move, I said that wherever maker went, breaker controlled the small diagonal of the same side, but going on the other column, the second column. Okay? And when maker plays a second move on the other side, okay, I actually didn't mention this, I think, but when he plays his second move on the other side, you will actually, of course, control the other small diagonal, but you also control the column on which maker has not played. Right, so, yeah. So breaker ends up playing on these two columns, and so even though we don't know exactly where breaker's squares are placed, we know that these two columns are safe. Okay? And what do we also know? Well, since the whole purpose of the strategy was to control the small diagonals from the beginning, we know that the small diagonals are both safe after these first two moves. Right? So actually, we only need to be careful about these two columns being filled up and the three rows. And actually, we can just defend this now by a simple pairing. It just suffices to pair the squares up in this way. Now, of course, some of these squares are already occupied, but none of them are occupied by maker, since maker's only moves are in these two squares. And basically, we say that whenever maker plays in one of these squares, breaker is going to play on the paired up square. Of course, breaker might have already played in the paired up square. But in that case, well, you can just play in any other square, and the strategy still works. Okay, so maybe take a couple of seconds to think about that and really convince yourself that it works. And notice that you have a very similar pairing for this second case. So once again, these two columns are already safe from breaker's first two moves. And then breaker can win thanks to the following pairing. Okay. So, we've gone over the case. So case 1, maker's first two moves are on opposite sides. So this is the case that we've gone over right now. Now we have two other cases to go over, as I outlined a few minutes ago. So case 2, maker's first two moves are on the same column. Okay, so in this case, let's look at the board. And we will place this column by permuting the columns. We will place the column here in first, and we actually don't really care about where maker has placed their squares and where breaker has blocked. We will just fill in this column to signify that it's entirely occupied, right? Because maker has played here twice and breaker has played here once for his second move. As I said, we have to react, so breaker has to block. We also know, of course, that breaker has another square here in one of these three columns, okay, and now maker doesn't have any squares, of course, over here, since he only has occupied two squares here. Okay, so what we can do here is we can, for instance, choose to place breaker square on the top left here of this 3x3 square. Right, so once again by permutation of rows and columns. So here the issue is that the second diagonal is actually not safe yet, because since breaker, okay, so breaker for his first move was able to block one of the two diagonals, but for the second move, breaker had to block maker's threat. So he wasn't able to control the other diagonal. So here we're actually going to look at maker's third move, which, as I said earlier, cannot be a direct threat. And after that move, breaker will be able to safely occupy the small diagonal, and then we will be able to get things running. So actually, I won't really care about the position of breaker's second move. I will care about the position of maker's third move, okay? I will place maker's third move here. So I will arrange the lines and columns such as maker's third move is here. And now we know that actually two of these three columns will be occupied by breaker after breaker's third move. So remember, breaker's second move is on this column, okay? Breaker's first move cannot be on the same column as maker's first move. And maker's first move was on this column here. So breaker's first move is on one of these three columns, okay? And what about breaker's third move? Well, for breaker's third move, we can choose, right? We can choose between the two squares of the small diagonal that we're occupying, right? And that means that we can choose between two different columns, okay? And these columns were not occupied by breaker before that. So we just need to choose a square that is on a column that was not occupied by breaker beforehand. Right, like you can pretty easily visualize this. Because of course the small diagonal that is occupied last is the one that is on the side opposite to this first column. So yeah, so basically breaker will be able during his third move to occupy a column that he had not occupied before. So so that means that two of these three columns are actually occupied by breaker if he plays correctly after his first three moves. And now it's just basic casework. So if these two columns are safe, then a simple pairing is, well, we need to of course, we need to ensure that this row is safe. We need to ensure that this column is safe, and these two rows, and that's it. If it's these two over here, well, then you can find a similar pairing, right? You're going to pair these together and then these. And if it's these two, then you are going to once again have to do this, this, and this. Okay, and so in every case we find a pairing that works. So since we've checked all of the cases, that means that breaker has a winning strategy in this second case. Okay, so we're almost at the end of the proof. We're just missing the third case, where maker's first two moves are on the same side and on different columns. Okay, so I will once again take the two cases that we had in this first large case. Okay, so remember these were the two boards that we could, without loss of generality, reduce the problem to in this first case. And of course here it's the same thing, right? But the difference with this case is that actually we cannot ensure that these two middle columns are occupied by breaker after breaker's first two moves. Right? Because since maker plays on the same side, well, remember that let's say if maker starts in column A, then breaker will occupy the small diagonal square that's in column B. Okay? So then if we're in this case, that means that maker's second move is in column B. So in the same column as breaker's first move. So actually here we will have a breaker square occupied in one of these columns, okay? And that means that one of these columns here will be not safe yet. Okay, so this is the only reason why we need to distinguish this case from the first one. But it's basically the same thing because the only difference is that the safe columns are one of the middle columns. So we can reduce the problem to, let's say, when the second column is safe, and one of the columns where maker has played. So, of course, without loss of generality, let's say it's the first column. So these two columns are safe. Okay, and once again, we just need to exhibit a pairing that works, and we will be done. So like this, and like this. Okay, so perfect. We found pairings that handle all of the different possible cases, and so finally we can conclude the proof and say that breaker has a winning strategy on this small board for the modified variant of the game that we presented. And as we explained earlier, this ensures, well, this strategy is a winning strategy for breaker on the whole infinite plane. Which means that the 8 in a row version of maker breaker is a breaker win. Okay? So I will link in description the paper by Zetters. Actually, there's a nice sort of anecdote about this paper, which I read about. So this paper was actually sent as a solution to a problem on the American Mathematical Monthly. And the problem actually only asked to show that the game is a breaker win when you're looking at 9 in a row. Okay, so like the committee knew about this result, as that was the most advanced result that had been proven at that time. It was like in the 70s, I think, or the 80s, and so they had asked this question, and so I think Zetters must have shocked him when he sent in a solution where he actually said, well, the case of 9 in a row is actually trivial because it was already done by such and such, and here I prove the case of 8 in a row. And then he presents his proof. Actually, the proof is very short, I find, and there are definitely some parts of it that would deserve to be explained in more depth. So this is what I tried to do here, to sort of fill in the gaps to make it clear and complete. So yeah, I think it's a pretty cool, pretty astute solution. And probably in the next video, I'm going to continue talking about breaker algorithms. So we already looked at pairing strategies. Here we looked at something more elaborate, but of course there are some even more flexible strategies that probably work even better. So I think I'll talk about that. Even though, spoiler alert, the case of 8 in a row is, of course, the best case that we were able to obtain until now. We don't know yet if 7 in a row is a breaker win or a maker win. But for now, 8 in a row is a breaker win. This is already pretty nice, and that's it for today.